All right. Okay, good morning, folks. And we're Team Guidance, and we are so excited and thank you guys for making some time in your days to come out and hear a little bit about
Oh, sorry.
Your yellow folder, how about there? The one that had.
Are we good? Oh, sorry. We're just gonna go ahead and mute everybody. I think that's gonna work best. But yes, thank you for coming out. And yeah, I think taking an hour to celebrate the fact that your children are in grade 12 and at a really cool point in their high school careers, and that there's some exciting decisions and conversations happening in your houses, I'm sure, and highlighting a little bit about what we do at TCS in the guidance department to hopefully get you and your children ready for that next stage. So we'll quickly just introduce ourselves. So my name is Matt Fox. I'm the Director of Guidance here at TCS, and I have some wonderful colleagues on the call here as well who work with your children, and I will let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Keith Brooks. I'm the guidance counselor for Bethune, Brent, and Rigby.
Hi, I'm Lisa Elson, and I work with Bickle and Wright House.
Deb, you're muted.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Deb Flintoff, and I'm working with Burns, Orchard, and Scott.
Wonderful. And yeah, I should have mentioned as well, if your child is in Hodgetts or Ketchum, they get to work with me. And then not on the call, but so important to our team is Tanya Skiok, who is our guidance assistant. You probably get some emails from her, or you may be emailing her summer school report cards or transcript requests and things like that. And she's a super valuable part of our team, and you can watch for that email or that name in your email at different points throughout this year. So I think what we'll just highlight really quickly, and later on in the presentation, we will talk about more specifically roles for the guidance counselor, students, and yourselves. But just as an overview about what we do here in guidance. So often I think folks think about their guidance counselor as strictly that academic and post-secondary support role, which we certainly do, and it probably dominates the majority of the conversations that we have in our offices. So those are things that we've worked with your children on for the last 3 or 4 years. So that's course selections, trying to help them with enrichment opportunities, summer school, goal setting, and now the fun world of post-secondary applications and looking at scholarships. But it is really important too to kind of acknowledge that we do support students on a social emotional level as well. So there's a variety of different reasons that a student might find themselves in our office, just looking for a safe space to land during their day, or trying to unpack some of the things that they're navigating as they go through high school. So I've listed some of the things there: self-esteem, stress, anger, etc. And again, if your child is looking for that level of support, you certainly should and can encourage them to speak with their guidance counselor as just one of the trusted adults on site for them, as well as we are a confidential space for them as well, so they know that they can speak with us kind of free of any worry or judgment, or knowing that that conversation isn't going to leave the walls of our office. We did talk a lot about the nitty-gritties if you were able to attend our Zoom call in February of last year for the grade 11 families at that time, about course selections, prerequisites for different university programs. We will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation today if you have some of those questions, but we've kind of omitted some of the really program-specific questions and are trying to just highlight, again, what does the grade 12 guidance program look like for your child? So that's what we'll do this morning. So I'll pass things over to Lisa.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. So really, for a lot of our students, I would say in grade 10 in the career studies course might be where they have first started thinking about life after TCS. So we'll cover things like their values, strengths. There's a personality test in there as well, some resume writing, and then getting into some post-secondary interest, exploring what life after TCS could look like. Your children have created a Google site that has actually kept all that information from grade 10. So I often encourage them to look back and see their growth from grade 10 into grade 12 and see if there's changes or if things have stayed the same. But it acts as kind of a great resource and checkpoint in there. And then through grade 11, and I would say more so to the second half of grade 11, we're getting into more so that nitty-gritty of exploring and researching their post-secondary ambition. So there are sessions for students who might be interested in the US or the UK or attending school outside of Canada. We'll talk a little bit about what the application process looks like, ensuring that they've chosen the courses that they need for the programs that are of interest. And then, of course, in grade 12, this is where we're meeting in terms of that application piece, the transition, what it's going to look like for life after TCS, and really encouraging them to keep up their research. And just to speak a little more into our intent of our grade 12 guidance program, we do have 4 things that we like to focus on when we're meeting with our grade 12. So one of those big ones being challenging the way that they think about happiness. So we often see a bit of a mindset of, okay, I'll get good grades, I'll get into the school, I'll get the job, and then I'll be happy. And we're trying to reframe that in terms of that fulfillment and great work and great success, but to appreciate and embrace that messy middle and that journey along the way and the growth and lessons that come with that. And that happiness can be throughout that process, not just the end goal. We also focus on decision making. We're a small community and our students like to talk with each other and hear what each other are doing and planning. But we really try and keep the focus on them and what's important to them and who do they want to be after TCS. So just ensuring that those decisions align with their values. In terms of developing those habits of the heart and mind that we love here at TCS, in terms of what have they developed in terms of their learning skills and strengths and habits here at TCS, and how are those going to help them in post-secondary, and how do those align with their values, and how are they living by their values every day. And of course, we're here to help and support in the post-secondary application and gap year planning. So getting down to that nitty-gritty in terms of what that's really going to look like, any help in terms of supplements, a few extra meetings maybe for those who have that larger application for the US and the UK. And I'm going to pass things off to Deb to break that down of what that looks like over the next few months.
Perfect. So how are we going to do this? I'm new to TCS. I've really enjoyed meeting the students that I've met so far. And the first thing we did was on the very first day, September 3rd, we met the entire graduating class in Levan. So we introduced our programming, introduced what we're planning to do in terms of supporting post-secondary application. We're also going to have a meeting January the 10th. And that is ideally going to be to make sure everybody has kind of wrapped up their applications. There's no outstanding applications. Everyone's feeling very good. We're also going to have 4 small group sessions by counselor. So we have already had our first of those 4 group sessions with our students. And that was kind of looking at things to be thinking about, as Lisa said, reframing happiness, looking at early deadlines, understanding the process. So we will do one of those roughly per month until December. We're also going to have 2 on-site post-secondary fairs. The first one is on Friday, October 18th. We're also going to have another on Friday, November 22nd. And we're going to be doing a variety of trips to post-secondary campuses. So we do feel it's really important, if possible, for students to actually walk the campus to see how they feel, if they feel as though they could belong there. So we are going to be offering a variety of trips, and that is on Monday, October 21st. Sign up will be coming out shortly for that. And then we will have an entry each month in the newsletter geared towards you as parents about what's happening in the guidance world. We did feel it was important to include some resources for you. This is a very big decision for students and for families. And already our offices are filled with students kind of trying to navigate this process, make a decision that feels good for them. So we did want you to have some access to websites and have some understanding about some of the resources available. The first one listed there is Ontario Colleges Info. This is an amazing website if your student is considering a college program or maybe is looking to do a university program that is in collaboration with the college. So on that Ontario Colleges site, students can search by program, search by the college. They can actually do their research there, actually apply through the program there and accept. So that's a really good resource. Ontario University's info, I would say, is probably the most important website that we use for students who are looking to pursue university in Ontario. I love this website. I look at it all the time. You can search by program, you can search by keyword. They have direct links to the universities, the program specifically, as well as an overview of the university. Financial information, so if students are looking for fee information or even what the cost will be, or scholarship information. And then there's also a link to the application. So it'll link them directly to UAC should they actually want to look at the actual application process. However, we're asking them to pause on that right now because we're going to lead them through that in October. There's also a really great comparison key on that OU info. So sometimes students will be navigating through, will find a really great program, really great university choice, and then struggle to find it again later. So we do suggest that they use that comparison feature, and that's really useful. In October, so October 5th and 6th, from 9:30 till 5 p.m. at the Metro Toronto Convention Centre is the Ontario Universities Fair. That's kind of a one-stop shop to all the Ontario universities if you're interested in and are able to get there. It is a free event where all the universities are there with all of their representatives. So it's a really great opportunity to walk around and look at all of the schools that maybe your student hasn't yet thought of or hasn't heard of. So this is a great opportunity. And then there's also virtual sessions. So if it's impossible for you to get to Toronto, you do have access to these virtual events September 25th and November 21st. And that, again, they're divided into 4 sessions. So you can choose the university specifically that you would like to learn from. And again, get information about programs, admission requirements, student life, all sorts of other things. And you can see there that the website is at the bottom. So ouevents.ca/virtual, and that'll give you access to those virtual sessions. All right, and if your student is thinking of US research, we did want to draw your attention to bigfuture.collegeboard.org. This is all things US application. I like this site because you can take a look at schools specifically. You can take a look at the statistics, what the admissibility rate is there, what the requirements are, whether they're test optional, and so on. So that's a really good starting point, or even maybe a finishing point to take a look at US research. If you have a student who's thinking about school in the UK, we've already asked them to start by creating a profile on UCAS. And in fact, yesterday we had an information session for students who are thinking about early admission to the UK. But that is a really great resource to explore, to search, also to look at programs, universities, finances, and so on. And ironically, there is a UK fair in Toronto tomorrow. It's a short fair. It's from 12 to 5 downtown. But if you're, again, able to access, I believe there's about 60 schools that are going to be there. And then there's the website information. And then beyond the state. So if you have a student who's thinking of more of a European experience and looking to attend an English language school in Europe, then beyond the states, this is great because you can actually search by country. So sometimes students will come in and say, I'd like to go to school in Ireland, or I'd like to go to school, wherever, in a different country around the world. This actually allows you to choose by country. So it's kind of a neat resource that way. And then finally, CanGap, if you have a child who is unsure about pursuing post-secondary next year, but would like to instead maybe look at a gap year, there is some really exciting and interesting opportunities on that CanGap website. And I did look at it just quickly last night, and there is actually a workshop coming up in October just to talk about travel opportunities should you have a student who's kind of on the fence and unsure.
All right. Hello, everyone. I just want to look at grade 12 application timelines. As it bears upon what's coming up right now, so we're in the month of October. For the select few that are applying early to the UK, this is like a direct entry program where you're applying to Oxford or Cambridge. The deadline is mid-October, but we actually have an internal deadline of October 5th just to get all that in. So if your child is working on those applications, they should have met multiple times already with a counselor, or at least they've worked through the summer on these applications and they're ready to go. It's an all-out kind of sprint right now. And then also for the US for early decision and early action, there are a couple of schools that have an October 15th deadline for the US. But most of that actually happens in November, November 1 and November 30th, for University of California schools and schools where a student is indicating a real significant interest by locking into a particular school for the US. In November, students can start to apply to the Ontario University Application Center. If they can do that earlier, we'll make students aware of that. The other thing that we're finding, so they can start on their Ontario applications, we're actually going to walk students through that application together just as a department, just to help them out, just to make sure that no mistakes are made, that, are going to have to be corrected later on. Also for students that are applying to the East Coast of Canada, specifically, like for example, Dalhousie University, we actually encourage students to apply early as well. We are just going to ask so that students apply to Ontario first, and then they can add in their East Coast applications. What's going to happen is they're going to get like a little code when they've applied to Ontario. Once they get that code, it's called an OUAC reference number. They can then take that code and they can use it to like send to other schools in Canada. And that's how those schools are going to get the marks when they're up to date. A couple pieces just in terms of, we often hear families talk about like, I want to apply early to schools in Canada. That really isn't a thing, broadly speaking, but there's a couple exceptions. And one is University of Toronto is now encouraging students to apply a little early, and University of British Columbia does that as well. We do front load the process though, so students should be able to do that, but just to keep in mind, if they're thinking about University of Toronto like a top choice school for a competitive program, they may want to apply early. The actual deadline to apply is in January, but we're going to want students to have applied to the US and the UK by December the 1st. That's just our internal deadline. And I just want to be encouraging here. Is I think some students and families are like, well, I'm not sure about this particular school. Well, that's fine. For Canada, you can keep adding in applications all the way up until the deadline. We're just looking for at least 3 programs applied to by December 1st. And just in conversations with your family, I would just encourage you as well. We're looking for a spread of schools for students to apply to. So, we know that students are going to be gravitating towards highly selective programs. That's fine. But if a program has a really, really selective admissions rate, we're also looking for programs that are going to be strong choices, and also programs that are going to have a very, very high degree, high chance of getting into as well. So we're looking for kind of a spread of schools. Your council will be working with your family on that. However, it's a good kind of talking point at home, just like not just looking at the selected programs, but other programs as well. In February as well, if a student is applying to college, that's due in February. But really, if they're thinking about college as well, I think it would be nice to get this done before the Christmas break. One of the reasons why we do that is because students need some time to work on supplements. So if you go to the next slide, please. So in just terms of how things are assessed in terms of Ontario applications, we set marks early, just in terms of whatever they've done is going to be in the system. In Ontario, they're just looking at completed grade 11 courses. We're then going to send an update in November. We're going to send an update in February, and we're going to send an update in April. And so the last set of marks, so it's encouraging. I think if students are not happy with their grades in grade 11, that's fine. We're sending in marks 3 times in this, or sorry, at least twice this year. There's a big February upload and a big April upload. And just to like encourage you, genuinely, schools in Canada are actually waiting for that April upload. And they will reserve a significant amount of seats. There's a lot of students in Ontario that are in a semestered school. They're maybe taking their grade 12 English course or their calculus course or whatever it is in the second semester. We're not a semestered school. Our courses run full year, but these schools recognize the fact that, okay, this kid hasn't taken calculus. We need to see a calculus mark, and they're going to wait for that that April setting. So some schools like McMaster will actually give out the majority of their offers past April. We do send again in June or July, and that's just to make sure that The schools want that just to make sure that your student has met the admit conditions for their program. So if a student receives an offer, they'll say, great, you're in, but, and you've got to read the fine print, you've got to maintain, say, an 84% average with an 80% in grade 12 English or something like that. There's a lot of questions as to like what schools are looking for in Ontario in order to give an offer. It's quite simple. They're looking at the top 6 average, which includes any prerequisites for that program. So if the student is applying to a humanities program at Toronto Metropolitan University, that's going to be grade 12 English, and then the other 5 courses or whatever's on there, just the highest grades. I know students and families get confused, and they're sometimes like, okay, well, I want to send this score and I want to send that score. It doesn't really work like that. We send all the scores, and it's really on the university end. They look through the marks. I don't know how they do it, but they look through the marks and they find the top 6 marks, and they will automatically calculate that. So the students and us and you do not need to worry about calculating it, but it's good for us to calculate it ahead of time just to kind of get a sense for where students are at and kind of predicting their admissibility in the program. Ontario is, for the more selective programs in Ontario that have a very, very high number of applicants, specifically like some commerce programs, engineering programs, and some kind of niche science programs, we're starting to see more supplements that are considered in the application. And these vary, but at the base, it would be some essays, essays about leadership or whatnot. They're all kind of different. And we're also seeing for some programs, most notably in commerce and engineering, we're seeing a trend of video interviews. Where I mean, I know if you've applied for a job recently, but there's typically video interviews done on the front end, and those universities are using the same system that are being used for prospective job applicants. We actually have access. We use one of those systems called Cura Talent, and I believe a number of universities use that system, and we make that available to our students to practice on. We've created our own kind of set of questions for students just to drill on and get more comfortable with that. It is important to note, just as you're having conversations in your family, just the website ouinfo.ca or Ontario University's info.ca is a great website. You should spend time on that. And also just look up the particular school websites. We do find sometimes that over the summer, things may have changed, where admissibility things have changed or deadlines have changed, and we're often not told about it. We find out mid-cycle. So it's just really important. We're encouraging your children to look into this now, just to double check, okay, has anything kind of changed with this program? Next slide, please. And then just for international applications, the US is, if your child is looking at the US, they're looking at everything. They're looking at all grades from grades 9 to 12, and they're looking at much more than just the grades in particular. They're looking at extracurriculars. They're looking at essays. There's a bunch of essays that need to be done for US applications. And they're also looking for things like the SAT. There may still be a chance for your child to write the SAT if they haven't done so, but for many schools that is optional. But it does seem like universities are moving back towards using the SAT in the future. Also, a big part of this, just like for the UK, there are letters of recommendation. There'll be 2 teacher letters, 1 counselor letter that would be needed, and your guidance counselor would be working with the student in question on that. Also, for kind of like all programs, there's a possible English language testing. If a student here has only studied in Canada for less than 4 years, and their home country, the primary language isn't English, I would assume that they are going to have to write an English language test like TOEFL or IELTS. And that's a really good thing just to get out of the way now, and to secure the score. The universities will all post different scores that they require on their website. But if your son or daughter or child fall into that category, then they should be action iteming that early. And then just a couple other things for the US. There's one decision that I think needs to be made is are you going to be applying early? Early decision where you're locking into a school. Early action where you're applying by November 1, but you're not locking into that school. And then regular decision options are just due by January the 1st. Those can be conversations that need to be had with your guidance counselor. And then for the US, we're just sending scores in November and February because the deadline to accept the offers is actually May the 1st. So the US operates on a different schedule. The UK is a much more streamlined application. It comes through a website, ucas.com. This is really a focus on academic achievement, and this is a bit weird, something called predicted grades. So this is just part of the culture of applying to the UK. We will include the completed scores for the courses that they've done in grade 11, but then teachers need to predict the score that the students will receive in their current classes. So there's no actual score that gets updated. It's a predicted score. And what I typically advise the teachers is that that score should be grounded in reality. So they should be looking at the completed relevant course in grade 11. They should be looking at the November report card as well. And there should be like a somewhat optimistically looking at what that grade would be in this year. There's a personal statement for this as well, and there's one academic reference. We've also talked about this with the students last year, but some schools do require testing. So like a lot of medical schools require testing. Some schools like Imperial or Oxford or Cambridge require testing. They should have already signed up for that, or at least be aware of needing to sign up for that and the deadlines for that. Some schools do require interviews, but that's typically just for very selected programs. And just one of the things that we stressed last year was just there's varying requirements for these programs. And so we encourage students to reach out just to double check that they're in the right courses, and that they kind of have a benchmark of like what the grades would be there. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Keith. And also just a reminder, I put a note in the chat. Feel free. We do have Q&A at the end, but if you've got questions coming off the top of your head right now, feel free to put them in the chat and we can help moderate that in the meantime. And there are just so many nuances, right? So we're trying to give the broad strokes of these things, but every school or every program might have something that's slightly different. So again, feel free to ask us if you have some of those nuances, or we have been working very closely individually with each of your students. So hopefully they've got that information as well. A little bit about scholarships here. We have lots of students in our offices asking about scholarships, what's available for them. And so I think that the most valuable resource we have for Ontario would be the scholarship report. So it's actually a database that we purchase on behalf of our students. There's a timeline, but it's somebody else that is putting together all of these awesome resources for students in terms of what scholarships are available. And it's not just scholarships, to be honest. So even if you have children in grades 9 to 11, I would encourage you to take a peek through it. You can gain access to it through your child's Google Classroom. And there's just like tips about how to write an essay for a scholarship. What different enrichment opportunities might there be? Job opportunities in the summer, like that. The May edition really talks a lot about employment opportunities. So this is a really great resource. And like I say, we purchase it on behalf of your students. So I hope that you and your families take some time to look at it. On top of that, there's two other websites, so ScholarTree and Scholarships Canada, which again are just two other databases that your student can apply to and then like fill out different criteria that they fit. And so these databases try to tailor what scholarships they might encourage your child to apply to based on the information that they've put into the system. It can be a little bit weedy to go through, but it is a good approach if a student is really, really feeling a bit nervous or anxious about the finances about post-secondary. There are a few scholarships that a student would need to be nominated by the school. So we have I recognize you can't click the link in the PowerPoint, but it is posted again in the Google Classroom that your child has access to, with a link to all the different scholarships that TCS would be nominating students for. So I've listed some of them there, and you'll see, so there's one coming up here, U of T National Scholarship, which is a major scholarship for domestic U of T students, and the Pearson International Scholarship, which is a major scholarship for international students who are hoping to attend U of T. And so students at TCS were advised about this about a week and a half ago. And so there's an internal deadline of today. So we have like a smaller sub application that they would submit to their guidance counselor. That application would then be shared with a scholarship committee. And then the purpose of the scholarship committee is to determine in an unbiased way who they feel is, the school's best representative in terms of earning that scholarship. Okay, so we try to do it in a really fair and transparent way. And those would be the ones. So like I say, the U of T deadlines were today. So though whoever our nominee is should find out early next week, and then we can start preparing their full application that we will submit to U of T. And then the Queens is, I think, our next one that kind of comes up in October. There's the Schulich, Western, and there might be other niche ones, that we're not as familiar with, or smaller schools that your student might be looking at or applying to. So obviously we encourage students, if they come across one that there does need to be a school nomination, to bring it to our attention, and we'll do our best to facilitate that. I think it's really important that you look at kind of the communities you're involved with. Usually workplaces have some small bursaries or scholarships that are available only to students who have a parent or guardian working in a certain place of work. So like banks, insurance companies, things like that are pretty common. And other organizations that you belong to. So maybe faith groups or extracurricular activities, things like that. Just take a peek at what other communities you have that might have access to. And it is true that so much money every year goes unawarded. Like not enough people are applying, or students are applying for these scholarships, so just nobody gets it. So we really do encourage our students to, if this is something that's important to you, take the time to do that research and look out. When it comes to international scholarships, I'll be honest that those are much far and fewer between. There are going to be resources that we can help your student kind of look at in terms of gaining scholarships for study abroad opportunities, but those are much harder to find and to get. But those would be some good one-on-one conversations for your counselor and your students to have. There is an upcoming scholarship, the Loran. We've let students know about it. It's a major scholarship. It's really celebrating students who have really kind of done something unique and extraordinary for a community that they're a part of. It does not require a nomination, but it does require teacher recommendations and things like that. So that would be a scholarship that your student would really need to be on top of right now if they were interested in it. Because you never want to approach someone who you're hoping is going to write a really glowing recommendation letter for you at the last minute. So we try to, coach our students through how to do that appropriately. Okay, I think this is maybe the last or second last slide here. And I think our hope and guidance is that these are fun and interesting conversations to have in your households, but we absolutely recognize that there's a lot of emotion that comes with these sorts of conversations, and that there can be like that can bring in stress and frustration and tension in the family. So this is by no means me trying to tell you how to have conversations or what conversations to have. It's just some suggestions in terms of really clarifying the roles in this process. And then I do have a couple of conversation starters if you find that helpful in your households. So first and foremost, like the student, we believe should be the center and the driving force in this process. We're all in the car with the student, but the student for sure is in the driver's seat. And we're trying to, let's start with the student. So drive the process, be fully engaged, research, know your deadlines, attend sessions with your guidance counselor, and be open to discussions, flexibility, and that sort of thing. So students will have more fun with the process if they are engaged and actively thinking about life after TCS. So then when it comes for counselors and parents and guardians, like we actually share similar roles. I think we probably have more experience in terms of how to nudge students in different directions and show them resources, but we're both doing the same thing. We're here to just listen, encourage, and support the young people that we're working with. It's really important, we can get really lost sometimes in the checklist of getting that application and going through this process. And so it's really important, I think, for all of us to make sure that we just remain on the human that's in front of us and support what that person needs from us in that moment. And again, with like that car seat analogy, let's try not to be backseat drivers and pointing out all the mistakes and the ways we think they should be going. If we could just be in the process with them, and really help them kind of figure out their strengths and what they're curious about, and help them lean into that, I think is really, really important. So, what might be some good conversations? And, Deb mentioned earlier that we do put a piece in the monthly newsletter. And in that newsletter, we try to include some prompts for you to have conversations with your children, that are kind of aligned with the conversations that we're having at that point in time in the year. So things that I would be encouraging you, instead of just focusing on, well, what do you want to be when you grow up, might be other questions like, what are you most excited for this year? Like, let's give them an opportunity to celebrate grade 12 and not be too focused on that next step. So let's let them be in this year for a little bit. Maybe asking them questions, what are they most nervous about this year? And that could feed into next year. Lisa talked on our effort to try to help students focus on their values. And again, that also goes back to our TCS mission and the habits of the heart and the mind. So what is really important to you? And then how do those things that are important drive your decision making? Because there's going to be some big decisions coming up in April, May, and June, when your student has to decide now, what are they going to do? So we hope that they kind of have a values lens when they're thinking about those decisions. Similarly, we're big on skill development, and Lisa talked on that in terms of habit development too. So what are the most important skills to your child, your student, and what are those most important goals? And then what are the habits that they already have in place that are going to help them achieve that? And what are the habits that they don't quite have yet that they might need your support or my support or their advisor's support in terms of helping them achieve that skill or reach that goal? Really big for me, and we did some professional development on this in June, and for some reason it just really resonated with me, this idea of the messy middle, and really kind of embracing the process. And it's good to have goals and set goals and be going somewhere, but that journey in getting to that goal is probably more important than the goal itself. Sometimes I like, if a student is feeling so fixated just on that goal, I like to help them think about what's going to happen when you find out that you got that goal. Like, what's that going to feel like? And then what's that going to feel like on the next day? Because the next day comes, right? And if you're just so focused just on that one goal, you kind of lose sight maybe on a long game there. Also, I think it's important that there's a reality of what if you don't achieve it? So let's think about the process in getting to that goal. Let's think about the fact that you might not achieve it and that your world is still a great world, and there's still going to be really awesome opportunities for you, and that's going to be okay too. But let's think about it so that their whole identity isn't kind of wrapped up on this single goal. More practically, you could talk about what schools they're maybe interested in visiting. So if you are local and you have the opportunity to visit some schools, maybe you take a weekend and visit one or two. And I would encourage you to ask questions ahead of time in terms of what might your student ask when they're on that tour, or what part of the campus are they most excited to see? And by helping our students think about those questions, I think it'll help their decision making again in April, May, June, when they're actually thinking about their school. A big one is we've invested a lot of time in their TCS tracking documents. So your student would know what that means. It's kind of a one-stop shop in terms of us being able to support all the research that they're doing and help make sure that they are doing research, and that we can try to catch any missing deadlines in case they haven't found them. And I would encourage you to ask your child to see that tracking doc, so you can join along in the research process with them and just see how engaged they are in the process. So I do think that's it. As I'm talking, I've seen the chat going, so I know folks are asking questions. But you are encouraged to either ask questions in the chat if you prefer not to unmute, or you can certainly unmute yourself and ask away.
Hi, I have a question.
Yeah, thanks.
We have lots of conversations at our house around what the university advertises as the cutoff for admission, and a little bit of a discussion that just because they post that particular grade, it doesn't necessarily mean that that it isn't much higher in reality. Any advice on how to speak to that with our kids? And
Yeah, for sure. I would say that, yeah, those marks are kind of historical grades, so you never quite know what the current year is going to bring to the table. We do encourage our students in terms of thinking a little bit about what would be a reach school, what's realistic, what's safe. And again, even those terms can be a little bit misnomers because you never really know what's going to come in that year. But we often say if your grades from last year, if you go kind of around that average or 5% lower in terms of those posted admission ranges. So if the student's grade is at it or 5% lower, we would tend to think of that as being safe. Okay, so if you're 5% lower, that would be safe. And then those benchmarks can kind of just go by 5%, then over it. So if your grade was 5% over, your overall average was 5% over the posted admission average, I would start calling that like safe and realistic. So you're kind of aiming to be 5% above whatever's posted to feel really comfortable with it. Keith did talk a little bit about supplements, and I think we use the language in our department that any school that has a supplement as part of the application should be considered reach, or you're just not feeling comfortable. Like those posted averages are just one part of the application, and we need to be cognizant of the fact that those supplements are being assessed in ways that we might not know. And so an 86% with a really strong supplement could beat out a student with a 95% average with a weaker supplement. So any program that's looking with those supplements, I would consider as reach or just like not feeling confident about. You don't quite know how it's going to shake out. And then otherwise, I would be always aiming for an average of 5% over those posted rates to feel really good about it. And that's why we do encourage students to kind of have a breadth of different programs that they're looking at. But sorry, anybody else from the team can feel free to jump in there.
when you say that average, you're talking about their top 6 if they're applying to an Ontario school, not their average for the whole year.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great point. So each program would have those prerequisite courses. So when you're coming up with that application average, yeah, I would use the grades that are in the prerequisites and then fill in until you get to 6 the next best grade 12 marks that they've been able to earn.
Hi, I have a question, and thank you to the guidance team. You guys have been so helpful with all of this information supporting our students. It's a lot more complicated than I remembered when I applied. Question, once offers are made, what's your sense or what's your advice when, different universities, make an offer, but you're waiting on another one and they have different deadlines? Like what does one do?
Yeah, I can take this. That's a really good question. It doesn't happen too often, but yeah, I think there is the odd case where sometimes, especially when you're navigating different systems, like different countries, where it's coming out at the offers are coming out at different times. I think there's two solutions to this. Number one, student and family could call a school to ask for an extension on the offer, and sometimes universities will grant that. And then the second piece would just be to accept and to pay the deposit. They're typically when you're accepting an offer, you've got to pay a deposit. And there's like, I would want to, this should be a one-to-one conversation with a counselor, anyone in this boat, because there are kind of some landmines that need to be avoided here. But sometimes I've seen cases where like a family's forced into that decision because they're still waiting on an offer from another country, but they're going to lose this offer if they don't accept by the posted deadline. So, and unfortunately, that deposit in many cases is at least partially non-refundable.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
sorry, I have another question. How many schools do you recommend that students apply to, just to, give them lots of options and increase their chances?
Yeah, I could take that. I think that I would say 3 is too little. I would say. I'm just looking at, and I only say 3 just because when you apply to Ontario, it forces you to apply to 3. I'd say more. I would say like a healthy range is between 6 to 8, 6 to 10. I think there's a danger on the other side. I've seen it where students are applying to, I mean, I've seen a ton of schools applied to. And I think part of that is because there's not a lot of certainty as to like where the student wants to go. But then it's pushing back the uncertainty to like April and May, where now a student may be sitting on about 7 or 8 offers and they don't legitimately know where they want to go. So I would say the sweet spot typically like 6 to 8, 6 to 10, but it's really kind of family. There's always circumstances that would warrant less or more than that. But typically that's like, I don't know, that's kind of the healthy range that I've seen with most families.
I did see a question in the chat just about what grades do get sent through for Ontario applications. And I think it's important just to recognize, yeah, we don't have an option. So we send our data file over to UAC, and that does get shared with the schools that your students apply to. And so those grade 11 marks, when the schools will be looking at them, if they're thinking about sending an early offer, that's kind of why they're looking at those grade 11 marks to see, is there evidence to, already have the full confidence that the student's going to rock it and give an early offer. So there's a lot of schools and programs that won't give early offers, like Keith mentioned, because they're waiting to see that grade 12 English mark or that grade 12 calculus mark sort of thing. But for the schools that do, yeah, they might look at those grade 11 marks. If those grade 11 marks or early round November marks are not that favorable, they really don't penalize your student in getting an application, or sorry, an offer later on. It really is kind of geared towards those early offers that are coming out. But as new information and more current and relevant information is coming out to those schools, the impacts of that diminishes, and they really just start focusing on what are the grades in those prerequisite courses and those top 6 grade 12s. So you shouldn't feel nervous about that information getting sent.
Hi, Matt. It's Kim Myers-Brooks' mom that asked the question. Thank you for reiterating or clarifying that. I really appreciate it. Just a follow-up question, though. So the particular situation that I'm mostly concerned about is what if the student has a course that they're looking to potentially drop and signed up for it that is relative to the course that they're potentially applying for university. So as an example, let's say it's a Bachelor of Arts and there's some, I know that it's only English, but let's say that there was some prerequisite course that the student had signed up for and had subsequently doesn't need the course and is going to drop it. But it's also the major that they want to take because it's an AP course and they've decided they don't want to continue and it's now gone to OUAC and they're dropping it, and it reflects maybe poorly on the fact that they're applying to a university for that program but are dropping a course in that field, if you will.
Sure. And definitely my colleagues feel free to add in here, but if your example, for instance, was a student that's applying to a Bachelor of Arts, maybe they took AP Psychology in grade 11 and they did really poorly on it, but they want to apply to a psych major, it will not hurt them if they have if they tanked it, if they failed it or whatever. Like, it really is, the school's not really going to look in Ontario. It's not really going to look at it at that level. It's almost like for a school that doesn't have a supplement and they're just really going off the grades, I'm imagining it's a computer that is like kind of sending out that offer, right? So it's going to take grade 12 English and it's just automatically slotting in the next 5 best marks and sending that off. It's going to take a look at that overall average and either give an offer or not. With the volume of applications that are going in, they really in Ontario are not going through and kind of cross-checking. Okay, they wanted a psych major. What did they get in that psych class? It's just not happening. So I hope that reassures you and answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thankfully, she did great in the psych class in grade 11. It's actually, she might drop the AP psych. That's specific here. And it's a grade 12 course that she doesn't need anyways, but I was just wondering the perception there. You're saying it's pretty much automated and so probably wouldn't be picked up anyway.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem.
Excuse me. I have a question about what about if somebody's interested in taking a gap year or a victory lap or whatever it is the application process just delayed a year, or can you apply and then apply for the following year?
Yeah, I can answer this. I would say, yeah, there's two options. I think for students that are intent on a gap year, you know, I've seen a bunch of families where the student doesn't apply at all. They just kind of thicken the research and then they're applying just the next year. And we're not needed for that. You just really need the transcript and you're okay to apply. The other thing I've seen families do in that case, because sometimes like a family's not sure about a gap year, it's a live option, but there's no certainty with whether it should be pursued. You just follow the regular application cycle. And then you apply. And then what would happen is if a student does get an offer that they like, if they don't get an offer that they don't like, there's no problem. They're doing a gap year anyways. They would just let the offers expire. But if they get an offer, they're like, oh, like I kind of want to do that. You would accept. I'm speaking from a more of a Canadian context here. It's probably going to be different for the US and UK. And I wouldn't be able to speak to that off the cuff. But in Canada, you would accept the offer. This is the frustrating thing. The university will not talk to you until you've accepted the offer, paid a deposit, and then you can kind of talk to them about a deferral. You can always call ahead of time to see if it's likely or not. The university is not bound to give a deferral. They're going to look at the reason for it. And specifically, they wouldn't want to see a student pursuing academic work in the gap year. That would render the offer void. And then if they accept it, they would hold that offer kind of moving forward. So probably just a conversation with the counselor in question just to kind of suss out those options and what the gap year would actually look like.
Okay, thanks.
Keith, did you want to speak to the question about AP classes?
Oh boy, yeah, sorry, I totally forgot about that. Yeah, there's a question about how universities look at like the AP classes, and what I would say for AP classes, typically in Canada, AP classes are not even considered on the admissions side, where it'll come live. Sometimes a student may be able to write about it on a supplement. The weight that a university would give to it, I'm not too sure. The benefit it would be just in terms of it's more just like I like to say, it's putting more weight on the bar to help students kind of adjust to the rigor of university life. And potentially, if a student scores well on an AP, and especially if they're scoring a 4 or a 5 on an exam, it could render them, they could be exempt from certain classes if they wanted to at the university level, which could maybe save a little money. On the US and the UK side, on the US side, the schools aren't really looking at the completed score. Like if your child is in an AP class right now, they're not so much going to evaluate the final score. They're just looking to see, okay, you're in a rigorous load that has APs. In the UK, if your student has applying to the UK with APs, the final grade in the AP could be a part of the evaluation process. Likely not, but it could be. But again, they're looking at kind of rigor. Canadian schools don't evaluate applications on the basis of AP rigor, just because quite simply it would be seen as inequitable because the majority of high schools in Canada don't offer AP classes.
Folks, it is 9:56. So I do just want to say thank you again. I think I saw at one point over 80 members in this Zoom call, and that's really, really amazing for us as the guidance team to see and just to know that we have your support and interest and engagement in this process with your students. So we are so thankful for our wonderful community, and it really is a joy to work with your students on this process and to work with you. So thank you for attending it this morning. If you have any questions, feel free to stay back, but I'm going to go ahead and stop recording this. And again, it is Friday and it's sunny out, so enjoy the day and your weekend.